Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating, Nepalese culture.
Yes, specifically we're looking at Chapter 4 of Dor Bahadur Bista's classic work, People of Nepal.
Right, you pointed us to this chapter, and it focuses on the Tamang people, particularly those in the hilly regions. Our plan is to kind of unpack Bista's account, see what insights we can pull out about their lives, their traditions.
Exactly. It's a valuable snapshot from the time Bista was writing, offering a window into one of Nepal's many distinct communities.
Okay, let's get into it then. So, based on this chapter, Bista describes the Tamangs as, well, a major group in the hills around the Kathmandu Valley.
He does. He mentions things like their traditional clothing and also the large loads they often carry. Gives you a hint about their lives.
Yeah, and he brings up this belief, apparently quite common, that they originally came from Tibet.
And the name itself is interesting, right? Vista breaks down Tamang Ta for horse and Mang for trader.
Horse trader. So a historical link there, probably important in that mountainous region.
Almost certainly. It suggests a significant role in, trade across those hills. He also touches on the term pot.
Ah, yes, he says it was historically used for Tamangs, but now it's seen as, well, derogatory.
Which is important context. It shows how terms and self-identification change over time. The move towards Tamang as the preferred term reflects their own sense of identity.
Definitely. Now, what about numbers? Bista couldn't get current figures back then, but he references a census from the early 50s, 1952-54.
That's right. Around 500,000 Tamangs recorded then.
The geography he outlines is quite specific. Most were east of the Kathmandu Valley, apparently.
Yeah, a big concentration there in the eastern Bagmati zone right outside the valley. That was clearly a major settlement area, according to Bista's research.
But also a fair number in the valley, and smaller groups scattered around.
And he makes an interesting point about smaller groups like the Tami and Pahari, also in the eastern hills. He says they kept distinct Tamang traditions, even though they were smaller communities.
Interesting. Suggests there's a wider Tamang cultural sphere back then. Okay, let's talk about land. Bista goes into this traditional system called kipat.
Ah, the Kipat
Yeah.
system. Yeah, that's key to understanding their traditional setup. It was strictly clan-based ownership, Bista explains. Communal land couldn't be sold off individually.
Really different from individual ownership.
Very. Now, Bista notes this system is largely abolished, legally speaking. Land is now mostly individually owned, taxed, the usual. But, as he points out, the legacy of that clan control, that idea of community land, still has some influence in certain areas. The memory or the social structures around it haven't completely vanished just because the law changed.
Right, so the legal shift didn't erase the cultural imprint immediately. Bista also describes where they typically lived, mostly middle hills, 5,000 to 7,000 feet?
Predominantly, yes. Though he does mention some living higher up, and even down in the lower Terai and the Rapti Valley.
So quite adaptable in terms of altitude.
Seems so. That middle hill zone, though, was ideal for their traditional agriculture.
And their villages. He describes them as pretty compact stone houses, often 2 stories.
Yeah, with a very practical layout, he observed. Ground floor, usually for animals, maybe storage. First floor for living, cooking, sleeping.
And the veranda was like an extra living space, too.
Yeah.
That sounds quite communal and practical.
Exactly. The house design Bista describes really reflects their agricultural lifestyle and probably the climate. Close-knit communities.
Now the economy. Agriculture was central, obviously, but Bista points out that their land holdings were often small.
Which created economic pressure. It meant many had to find other ways to supplement their income.
Like borrowing money or doing seasonal work. He mentions jobs like porters, coolies, even domestic servants, often in Kathmandu.
Yes, that reliance on outside labor, as Bista documented, shows an early link between these rural Tamang communities and the urban centers. They had to adapt economically.
Makes sense. And the crops they grew. He lists things like maize, millet, wheat, barley, potatoes, high-altitude stuff.
All staples suited for those middle hill environments. Plus, livestock, of course, cows, buffalo, chickens were also important, according to his account.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to social structure. Bista really emphasizes the clan divisions, the thars.
Absolutely central. He mentions a list of 25 thars, and the crucial rule is exogamy.
Meaning you have to marry outside your own clan, your own thar.
Precisely. That's fundamental for creating wider social ties and preventing in-marriage.
But Bista adds a little wrinkle, doesn't he? You can generally marry into any other clan, except for 2 specific ones, Goli and Junjan.
Yes, the brother clans. They're treated as equivalent to your own clan for marriage purposes. You can't marry into them either.
Fascinating. Suggests a really close, maybe historical or mythical bond between those two Thars in particular.
It shows the layers of complexity within their kinship system, as Bista observed it. It's not just one simple rule.
And he stresses that everyone in the Thar traces their roots back to a common ancestor. That's a big part of their identity.
Lineage is key. He notes that while mapping all Nepalese groups genealogically hasn't really worked out, within Tamang society, your clan absolutely defines your social standing, your ritual status. It gives that strong sense of shared heritage, a common feature in many traditional societies, providing that framework for who you are and who you're connected to.
Okay, marriage practices. Vista goes into quite a bit of detail here. Arranged marriage was the norm, especially for a first marriage.
Yes, typically involving agreement between the families.
And there was a specific preference he mentions, cross-cousin marriage. So marrying the children of a brother and sister.
Right, marrying your mother's brother's child or your father's sister's child, that's often seen as a way to keep alliances and maybe property within related family lines. Parallel cousin marriage father's brother's child or mother's sister's child was discouraged.
Interesting strategy. What about other forms?
Well, Bista does mention widow remarriage was allowed. Specifically, a widow could marry her deceased husband's younger brother.
The leveret practice.
Exactly. Though he notes polyandry, one wife, multiple husbands was rare. And he also points out there was social stigma for young women who had children outside of marriage.
Reflecting the norms of the time, I suppose.
Seems likely. The leveret marriage probably offered some social and economic security for widows and kept the family line going.
Bista also mentions elopement and even capture marriages existed.
Jay did. But even these weren't totally outside the system. They were often followed by negotiations, compensation paid to the girl's family.
And the husband had to pay up if you wanted to formalize it after an elopement or capture.
Yes. Bista details a stipulated amount. It suggests that even less conventional ways of marrying were kind of brought back into the social fold through established procedures. Shows some flexibility, perhaps.
And payments were part of regular marriage, too, or remarriage and disputes.
He gives specific examples. If a woman remarried, the new husband traditionally owed the former husband compensation 60 rupees and some clothing, according to Bista's account.
60 rupees. And what about infidelity?
If the husband committed adultery, Bista says he had to pay a 40 rupee fine directly to his wife.
Wow, quite specific rules there. Seems like they had codified ways to handle these situations.
It points to the economic aspects tied up in marriage and divorce and community mechanisms for trying to resolve things.
And the wedding ceremonies themselves. Bista says they varied.
Quite a bit, yeah. Depending on whether it was fully arranged, the family's finances, that kind of thing. Even elopements usually had some kind of simplified ceremony later on.
He mentioned Zendi visiting the bride's house with gifts and relatives.
Yes, that was common. And Gorda gifts the bride's parents gave her. Plus reciprocal gifts. It was all part of making the marriage official, getting social approval, and helping the new couple set up their household.
A whole process. Okay, let's turn to religion and rituals. Bista states clearly, Tamangs are predominantly Buddhists.
Yes, Lamaistic Buddhism. He notes monasteries, religious paintings are common features in their communities. It's deeply woven into their culture.
And the lamas, the religious figures, hold a lot of respect.
A great deal. Bista describes them teaching scriptures, conducting all the major life ceremonies, birth, death, marriage. They often looked after the local temples, too. Vital figures.
Spiritual guides, community leaders.
Exactly. Kind of the intermediaries, guiding people through life's big moments and upholding traditions.
And Bista talks about lots of festivals and rituals, jangs, throughout the year.
Often tied to the farming calendar, community well-being. Lamas would officiate. Sometimes, Bista notes animal sacrifices were part of these, aiming to ensure good harvests or health.
So integrating religion with the practicalities of life.
Very much so. These events reinforce community ties, mark the seasons.
What about death rituals? Bista describes funerals involving burning firewood, making offerings.
Yes, and then a significant ceremony called Syarki Tongsi within about a week or two after the death.
Involving a feast, community contributions.
Right. And then another major ceremony later, maybe 6 months or a year down the line. These were clearly important community processes for mourning and honoring the dead, reflecting their beliefs about the afterlife.
But it wasn't just Buddhism, was it? Bista mentions other elements too.
Correct. He points out that elements of ancestor worship and belief in local deities were also incorporated. There's the Bampo.
The shamanistic priest.
Bisa says the Bampo deals more with spirits, local deities, often called upon for things like illness or misfortune. Then there's a specific type, the Jonkri Bampo, who handles clan-related spiritual matters.
And sometimes a lama from another clan might get involved in those clan ceremonies too.
Yes, Bista observed this mix. It's a kind of syncretism blending Lamaistic Buddhism with older shamanistic and animistic beliefs. It seems they utilize different specialists for different kinds of problems, a pragmatic approach.
Right, covering all the bases, spiritually speaking. Okay, finally, Bista touches on social change, modernity creeping in, even back when he was writing. He notes Tamangs had faced exploitation historically.
Yes, sadly, that's often part of the story for many marginalized groups, reflecting historical power imbalances that Bista alluded to.
But he also saw some positive signs, like more access to education.
Although challenges remained, he noted more Tamangs were pursuing education, even higher education. That's usually a key driver for social change and hopefully empowerment.
And linked to that, perhaps, was migration. He mentions more educated Tamangs moving to Kathmandu and other towns.
Yes, and he uses the term detribalization, suggesting this urban migration could lead to a weakening of ties to their traditional villages and ways of life.
It's that classic rural-urban shift dynamic.
Exactly. Urban life offers opportunities, but often comes at the cost of some traditional structures and practices fading as people adapt.
So, wrapping up our look at Bista's Chapter 4, it gives us this really rich picture. The Tamang history tied to trade, that strong clan identity persisting despite land system changes, unique marriage customs, the deep Buddhist influence mixed with other beliefs, and then facing these forces of modernity.
It really does. Bista's account highlights the resilience, maintaining a distinct cultural identity while navigating some pretty significant social and economic shifts over time.
It leaves you wondering, though, considering that shift Bista described, from the communal Kipat land to individual ownership and this ongoing pull towards cities, how might those core Tamang social structures, the clan identities, continue to change? What parts of their tradition, based on what we've read in Bista, seem like they'd be the most, well, resilient going forward?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's always a dynamic interplay. Economic pressures, city life, they definitely force adaptations. But things like that deep-rooted clan feeling, the religious foundations that Bista documented so well, those often persist, maybe taking new forms. It's an ongoing story, for sure, how those traditional elements and modern pressures will continue to shape Tamang society. Bista gave us a vital baseline, but the evolution continues.